they might really be. You know?
Minelle.
And that goes back to a lot what Rainer was speaking about earlier, right? This idea that in the States, the multiracial movements were in fact led by white women who were really experiencing a lot of racial anxieties over the birth about their mixed race kids. And they didn't want not to be recognized, you know, the whiteness of their children to be recognized. Like that's been a really important part of thinking about this white-black kind of binary that's so structured, the multiracial debate in the US. But then what do you do with people like me and Sarah, right? Who come from these racialized minority backgrounds? I mean, we're not white and black, we're really outside of that paradigm. So it really behooves us to think about how to complicate these categories and to think about mixing as mixing between different racialized groups. It's not just a black-white debate anymore.
Robbie, earlier in the show, you talked about, you know, when you were younger, trying to find role models, people that looked like you or represented you in some ways. And I'm wondering, you were a young, I don't know how old you were in 1997, but you were a younger guy. Tiger Woods comes onto the scene.
Not so much. No, the first time it really happened was really with Obama. And that's why I was slightly disappointed that he didn't really embrace his mixed racial identity more than he did. I mean,
Did he not, or did people not let him?
You know, that's complicated. I think it's because he was in the States, you know. I don't know, forgive me, but I mean, I do think that there was probably more pressure there and I think in trying to figure out who he was. I mean, I read his books, and I think that, you know, he said that he really felt more comfortable. He dated outside the black and race, and then he, you know, that was just what happened to him. But what was disappointing to me was that he didn't really, you know, fully embrace his mother's half. I mean, like, to me, it's like erasing half of who you are. Like, it's in a way, it's insulting to your parent, who is the other race that you're saying you're not. You know, so that was the very first time. I mean, he's someone who's obviously thought about, you know, his mixed identity in his writings, and he wants to make a difference in the world, and he was the first person that I really felt, wow, I feel, not that I have a lot in common, I feel like I had something in common with the most powerful man in the world, but but I just felt that, wow, this guy really understands race in a deep way, and it's so great that he is the president of the United States, and why I just wish he would have embraced a little bit of the other half.
Rainer, I want you to pick up from that, because I guess I'm going to be a bit of an apologist for Obama, but people really didn't allow him to be who he wanted to be in terms of self-identify. I mean, for goodness sakes, they wouldn't even accept what religion he's from. So, I mean, pardon me, the Obama. So is Obama, I mean, is it his fault, or how much does he have to own this discussion?
Well, I think the religion issue is part of a racism issue. You know, he went to a black church, however controversial that may have been, that particular church. He went to a black church. You didn't find black people in the United States questioning his religion. So I really think that just like the ridiculous birther issue, that the religious issue is a racist issue. It's a tool that's used against. It's a way, as the lady was saying just a moment ago, Jean. It's a way of being racist without looking like you're being racist. However, to the question of his choice on the census, I find it fascinating as I sit here in Las Vegas, listening to everyone so assured that Obama was forced to choose black on the census. You know, one of the things about the mixed race movement is not that anyone on the show is a member of the mixed race movement. I don't actually know, but how often it will say people should be free to identify as they are, and yet you find people saying that, well, Obama let us down, or Obama was forced to choose black. I mean, let's give him credit for if he feels like blackness, whatever, in whatever way he's conceptualizing it, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, whether it's even biological, I don't know. But let's give him credit for the answer that he gave and not question him. You know, people who are mixed race will often say, well, people are questioning my mixed race identity. You know, why don't I just, you know, say I'm black, or when I just say I'm Filipino? But we're willing to do to Obama what we don't want people to do to us. And I think it's really fascinating to look at.
Okay, I'm going to move on because we only have about 10 minutes left, and we've all mentioned the word categorization, and I want to talk about that. I want to bring up one last thing. This also comes from the Canadian census, and this is about a question from this year's census, Canadian census, about how you self-identify. And here's what it says. Mark more than one or specify if applicable. Here are your choices. White, South Asian, and then in parentheses it has, are you East Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan? Chinese, Black, Filipino, Latin American, Arab, Southeast Asian, again in parentheses, a number of options, West Asian, Korean, Japanese, and the last option is other, specify with a line. Ravi, let me start with you. What do you make of these categories?
Well, I do think that they're, like I said, I think it's important to document and so that we have information. So I was very disappointed that, you know, the census was killed in terms of the mandatory nature of it. And having all that information, I know, is very important so that we can address inequality in society and address systemic discrimination, et cetera. So I do think that it's important to get the information out there so we can do something about the inequity in our lives. But, you know, in terms of how, it's tricky. I mean, I would always tick off other because, you know, yes, professionally it's South Asian, but I mean, I do feel that it's, you know, I really want to recognize both parts. So, and to Reiner's point, like, it's not that I would judge Obama necessarily, but I guess what I'm saying is, you know, it is exciting to me when I meet other people who are mixed race because it's so rare, and you know, less so in Toronto. And I remember saying to my sister and brother, we should form this movement, mixed people of the world unite, you know, and just, you know, to sort of gather around a bit more and just to meet people who are like us and have the same sort of experiences we do. So not without, you know, I'm not judging him, but I'm just saying I was just a little bit, you know, hoping that he would embrace it more. But anyway.
Jean, I want to ask you this. What are you going to check off on this list?
Don't you think it's bizarre that most of them are cultural identities or geographic identities, but white is color only? And I mean, what does that mean? I mean, if you're white, I mean, theoretically it should be European or African or something to be consistent with this, but you've got one color identification in there. And there's nothing in there that says black, right? There's nothing in there that says red or
Brown.
yellow or anything like that. It's only, it's the most strange collection. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall while they were having their discussions, deciding how they were going to put that together. And what are you going to make of it anyway? The answers.
It does say black, but it doesn't.
Sorry, it does say
no,
black.
but
I
it
missed
doesn't
that.
say red or brown or the other things. I mean, where do you fit into this list? Because I'm really going over it, and I'm looking at you and remembering what you said about your background.
Yeah.
You're going to check other.
I check everything. I just go all of it because I'm sort of I'm not interested in you know, saying, oh, I'm not this or I'm only that. I take it that the point of the census is to get accurate information. So I'll give you all the things that I am, but the question of, you know, I'm not sure. So what is the actual question? Is it how do you identify?
How do you self-identify?
Self-identify.
Yeah.
See, but I mean, at any given time, I can self-identify as a dozen different things. You know, I mean, I'm a woman. You know, I could identify by my language group, I could identify by my religion, I can identify by my family, by where I live today, by where I lived when I was a kid, by what color I am, by what color I am in the summer, you know, and if I'm hanging out with my Métis, and I do a lot of work with Aboriginal people, they tend to just look at me as Métis. And Riel, right? So that's a huge, huge identity factor. But if I walk the streets of downtown Toronto, like that's not an identity factor for me. So I think it's a bizarre question. I mean, I'd almost write them to say, how do you identify in the morning? How do you identify in the afternoon? How do you identify when you're in church? And how do you identify when you're with your grandparents? I mean, or how do you identify when you go visit Greece? You know, I mean, all of those things. See, that means, that's just meaningless.
We have less than 5 minutes left, and I want to leave a little bit of time. And Minelle, I want to go to you on this. What are the, you know, social policy implications for things that come out of these kinds of questions on census? And Reiner, I'll come to you after this, but let me start with Minelle.
Yeah, no, I think I really take Jean's point, because there's this one thing that came up in a lot of my research is the problematic nature of this question. And why do we have these questions? It's really to think about the kind of social planning that we need to do in order to develop our worlds in some way. And if you have a question like this, where people don't even know how to begin to answer the question because they're unhappy with the question, what kind of answers are you going to give? And one thing that happens with a question like that for women of mixed race, at least in the research that I've done, is they just get so flummoxed and angry with the question that they check off everything. So how is that going to help policymakers discourse in regards to making change. And again, like Jean says, people change the way they identify over time. Like a lot of people will identify as other, but then what do you do with that other category? It really doesn't help you in terms of thinking through resources and the allocation of resources. So my point is really thinking about this relationship between identity and loyalty. You can have loyalty to many different groups, even if you do have a multiple identity, but it's how that's negotiated. Because a lot of the women I talked to said, I identify as mixed, but when it comes down to that census, I check black, because I know what that means and I know the difference that can make.
Reiner, in the U.S., in your census, you can also check off more than one category. What is it? What are the implications of checking off boxes for social policy?
Well, I don't know how these categories developed in Canada, but I can tell you that my first book, I looked at how they developed in the United States. And although they look very disparate and not matching, and some are geographical and some are race-based, the original categories in the United States were black, white, Asian, Native American, and Hispanic, either as an ethnic category or as a race. And the reason was, we're trying to, because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the necessity of anyone who receives money from the federal government being able to prove that they're not in violation of these acts, we had to have compliance. How do you show compliance? You show compliance through statistics. And so these categories are actually the black, American Indian, Asian, Hispanic. These are categories of groups. These are people who were discriminated against by the United States government. And then the leftover category is white. So although they are confusing and there's a big disconnect between the categories and the public, it really does great damage to tracking civil rights violations when people check all the categories. Ideally, really the best way to handle it is for you to check off, maybe not so much the census, but on the other forms. I guess in Canada you have all these other forms also. Loan applications, federal aid for financial aid and schooling. It's really the best thing to do is to check off the way you are perceived, because it's not an identity contest. It's a contest to determine who's getting resources, who's being discriminated against. Racists don't care what you are. If they see something they don't like, that's what they're reacting to. The racist doesn't care if you're mad. When I get discriminated against, I'm discriminated against because someone sees me as black. They don't discriminate against me because they see me as half white. That's the point I'd make.
Folks, we're going to have to leave it there, but I want to say this before we go. You know, we had a guest on, a gentleman named John L. Jackson, after Obama's victory, to talk about race and the discussion of race in North America. And he said it was time to develop a new conceptual framework, to have an open and honest discussion that does more than pay lip service. And I hope at least today we took this discussion a little bit further. Thank you to all of you for joining me tonight. In Las Vegas, Nevada, Reiner Spencer from the University of Nevada.
Thank you for an awesome experience.
Thank you. And here in studio, Minelle Mahtani, who's a professor of geography and journalism at the University of Toronto. And on my other side, Sarah Grzinsic, who is completing a master's degree at the U of T. Ravi Jain, who is a lawyer with the Toronto firm Green and Spiegel. And Jean Taye, who is the great-grandniece of Louis Riel and also a partner in the law firm Pape, Salter, and Taye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.